So, we're about to dive into one of the most famous books ever written. But here's the crazy part. It was never supposed to be a book at all. It was just the private, secret diary of a young girl that somehow ended up giving a voice to millions.
You know, even Anne Frank herself thought writing in a diary was a bit weird. I mean, she was only 13. She wrote that she couldn't imagine that she, or anyone else for that matter, would ever care about the musings of a 13-year-old schoolgirl. She had absolutely no idea how wrong she would be.
But long before this diary became this monumental historical document, it was something else. It was basically a playground for an incredibly sharp and witty mind. And one of the first big challenges she wrote about? It wasn't about hiding from the Nazis. Nope. It was all about how to creatively deal with a grumpy math teacher.
And that brings us to this fantastic little story from her school days. It's a tale about a super talkative student and a teacher who was just determined to get her to be quiet.
All right, so let's meet the teacher. His name was Mr. Keesing. In Anne's own words, he was an old fogey who taught math. And the one thing that drove him absolutely nuts, Anne's constant chatter. So after a bunch of warnings, he decided to punish her with extra homework. And these punishments just kept escalating. First, he makes her write an essay on a chatterbox. So Anne writes this clever piece arguing that talking is just, a student's trait. But she didn't stop talking. So boom, a second essay, an incorrigible chatterbox. She writes that one too. Finally, after a third time, he gives her this totally ridiculous title for a final essay. Quack, 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 said Mistress Chatterbox. Okay, so at this point, the entire class is just roaring with laughter. And Anne could have just written another boring essay, but honestly, she was kind of out of arguments for why talking is great. So she thought, nope, it's time for something completely different. She gets a little help from her friend San, who is good at poetry, and they decide the joke is going to be on Mr. Keesing this time. And what she came up with was just brilliant. Instead of an essay, she writes this satirical poem. It's about a father swan, who is obviously Mr. Keesing, who bites his own baby ducklings to death just because they quack too much. How sharp is that? It was funny, a little dark, but just a total masterpiece.
And guess what? The risk totally paid off. Mr. Keesing got the joke, completely. He loved it so much he read the poem out loud to her class and even to his other classes, adding his own little comments. And from that day forward, she was allowed to talk and he was always making jokes. She had totally won the battle of wits.
So that incredible cleverness, that wit we just saw, it wasn't just for outsmarting her teachers. All of that was being poured into her diary for a much, much deeper, more personal reason.
And this right here, this was the core idea that started it all. She felt that paper would just listen. It wouldn't judge her, it wouldn't interrupt, it would never get tired of what she had to say. And that's something she felt she just couldn't get from people.
And that's the real paradox here, because on the surface, Anne was anything but alone. I mean, she had loving parents, an older sister, and like 30 people she called friends. But she felt like all they ever talked about was ordinary, everyday things. She just couldn't seem to get any closer, She couldn't really, truly confide in anyone.
So to try and bridge that gap, she made a decision. Her diary wasn't going to be just a book for writing down facts. No, it was going to be her friend. She even gave it a name, Kitty. And she wrote to Kitty as if she were that one true, long-awaited friend she'd always been searching for. Okay, so to really grasp the weight of everything she wrote to Kitty, we have to take a step back and look at the world she was living in, the world she was being forced to hide from.
Her life really can be summed up in a few key moments. She was born in Germany, but her family had to flee to Amsterdam when the Nazis came to power. They thought they were safe, but then the occupation spread and they were trapped. So in July 1942, the whole family went into hiding. They managed to stay hidden for 2 years until they were betrayed. Anne tragically died in a concentration camp just weeks before it was liberated.
So Anne's own story tragically ends in 1945. But the story of her diary, of her friend Kitty, well, that was just getting started. And its journey from a hidden annex to the world stage is nothing short of incredible.
Think about this. Of the 8 people who were hiding in that annex, only one person survived the war. Just one. Anne's father, Otto Frank. He had to endure the unimaginable, losing his entire family.
So when he finally returned to Amsterdam after the war, a family friend gave him Anne's diary, which they had managed to save. He read it, and he just knew it was a unique and powerful record. He made it his life's mission to fulfill his daughter's dream of becoming a writer by getting it published.
And the impact it had, it was just massive. The diary has been translated into so many languages, it's become one of the most widely read books on the planet. It's been turned into movies, plays, even an opera. It has truly touched the hearts and minds of people all over the world.
Everyone, from critics to everyday readers, they were just stunned. This was so much more than the musings of a schoolgirl that she thought it was. People hailed it as the work of a truly mature and insightful mind. It gave this incredibly intimate, human look at what it's like to live through something so horrific. So when we read her diary, it's just so important to remember the real person behind those words. She wasn't just a victim. She wasn't just a symbol. She was a young girl absolutely full of life, with a wicked sense of humor and big dreams for her future.
She actually wrote this next to a photo of herself, and it really shows you she was just like any other teenager. She had dreams. She wanted to go to Hollywood and be a star. It's such a simple, hopeful wish, and it's just this gut-wrenching reminder of the vibrant life and all that potential that was so tragically cut short.
Which brings us back to that big question. How does a teenage girl's diary become one of the most important voices in history? It's because it captured so much more than just the events of a terrible time. It captured the timeless, totally relatable, and unbreakable spirit of a young person who, even in the darkest corner of the world, insisted on seeing the light.